If video games were more like reality, they would be exponentially harder, which is why many of the mechanics we find in games serve a specific purpose, especially when dealing with a game's difficulty and accessibility. Now, many of these mechanics are video game concepts, mechanics that would otherwise make zero sense in the real world if they were applied, and often threaten to take you out of your immersion within a game based on that fact alone. Most people suspend their disbelief. Like we said, it's a video game concept, therefore we cut it some serious slack. But taking a closer look at some of these mechanics that stealth games and other titles have incorporated into stealth game styles can be pretty nonsensical if you take a moment to really consider what's going on. So today we are counting down the top 10 stealth game concepts that no one understands, or rather ones that don't really make much sense in the context of the real world. So with that in mind, let's get to it. Starting us off in at number 10, seeing through walls. Over the years, we've seen a bunch of different mechanics introduced in video games, stealth and other genres alike, that allow players to get a better idea of where their enemies are lurking. One of those usually manifests in an ability to see through walls. Hitman, for example, is one of the series known for this. You're able to know where your enemies are at, so you can use this knowledge to avoid potentially dangerous circumstances where you out your location. This has even become a mainstay in many games that offer stealth mechanics. In The Last of Us, for example, you can hear where your enemies are. It was better justified as the ability to hear where your enemies were, but the ability feels almost superpowered as you continue to upgrade it through progression. Still, it's a little bit better than Hitman's. More challenging. Up next at 9, hiding in water or under tunnels. Let's get hypothetical for a second here. Say you are on the run from a foe, someone who has spotted you and is chasing you. You decide that the best way to get rid of them is by jumping in a nearby lake, because yeah, they definitely won't be able to see you swimming in it since water most definitely isn't a clear liquid, right? Well, that wouldn't work in real life, but it sure does in some stealth games. While this has gotten notably better over the years, it used to be an issue in previous Assassin's Creed games that in recent titles has changed, there are still plenty of titles out there that provide players this little shortcut of sorts. In some other genre games, we've seen this pan out in other areas like tunnels, particularly in GTA 5, where managing to get yourself under a tunnel if you're out of the police's line of sight basically means you've gone away entirely if you're willing to wait a minute or two. Kinda silly, but useful. And at 8, crouch walking. Crouch walking is one of the most baffling game mechanics. Not within the games themselves, of course, but what that crouch walking would actually entail in real life. No one could possibly manage to crouch walk as fast or as long as the protagonists in our video games do without seriously messing up their body. Knees, man. Your knees. But it is a mechanic we rarely ever think about, and is often expected to appear in most video game titles. Splinter Cell is where it first debuted, and since it has been incorporated into a ton of games, like Skyrim. I once leveled up my stats on my skill tree for sneaking thanks to crouch walking for an hour. I did that, just saying. And at 7, hiding in crowds. Hiding in crowds was a staple in many stealth games about a decade or so ago. It's still kicking around, but to be fair, many franchises like Assassin's Creed have slowly phased it out. The idea of avoiding guards or enemies all by slipping into a crowd of people is a little absurd in real life. Now, despite this, at the time that mechanic in the game was praised as being new and inventive, and of course is very much a case of the player suspending their disbelief. Which, fair enough, makes sense. But speaking of crowds, in our next number at 6, killing in crowds. Now, in some stealth games, if you assassinate someone in a crowd, it is no big deal. Case in point, the Hitman series. Deaths can occur in plain sight in public places populated by many, and your target will die, yet no one will notice. You can see why that would be slightly problematic in real life. Say you're standing behind a bar and you poison a drink and then give it to a patron who is your target. Generally, poison usually takes a hot sec to actually kick in, not that I am an expert or anything, but let's say after about 30 seconds in our hypothetical scenario here, that patron starts convulsing and then dies, his head slamming down forehead first into the bar. No one's gonna notice that? There isn't immediately gonna be an outbreak of panic? Yeah. Suspend that disbelief. And at 5, detection meters. One of the staples of stealth games is that there are detection meters. This means that when you're close to an enemy and they spot you, you have a slight grace period before they fully acknowledge the fact that yes, you were there and you were a threat. Rather than it being immediate as it would be in real life, you're allotted a certain amount of time to retreat and return to cover, remaining hidden. And that enemy thinks they just saw a whole lot of nothing, that their eyes are playing tricks on them, resuming their regularly scheduled programming. Well, this is yet another suspend your disbelief moment, something that exists within the game to make it more accessible and to sustain a certain level of difficulty to seem fair. It is definitely something that in real life would never occur, and some players have even complained that it takes them out of being immersed altogether. But perhaps what's more annoying is what happens when you are fully detected, which leads us to our next number, and at 4, your whereabouts. So, say you were spotted by an enemy. The detection meter goes off, or is, full, they 100% spot you and they start running your way to end you. Sure, it's believable that they could alert other guards or foes to help them take you out, but usually when an enemy spots you, you'll often find that the game will alert all of the enemies in the nearby territory. It's like all of a sudden everyone knows where you are and they're coming for you. Next thing you know, you have a violent, rabid parade of guards ready to murder you. Hitman is pretty notorious for this, and in some cases Assassin's Creed games can also be somewhat guilty of this too. Although in Odyssey this mechanic is a bit hit or miss. Sometimes guards will flock to you, other times you can manage to keep it as a contained issue. Up next at 3, predictable patterns. This one is my personal pet peeve. Once you can predict the patterns of enemies patrolling, the game becomes exponentially easier. For example, say you're hiding in a bush somewhere. You're watching guards patrol a variety of different levels in a fort that you're infiltrating. You notice the pattern of one of the guards and manage to use that knowledge against them to take them out. You drag their body into the bushes in order to avoid detection. Then as you go back to hide in your bush, another guard moves down to replace that guard and their pattern. You knock them out, drag them into your bush, continue to hide until another guard replaces them. Come on people, this is too easy. Obviously that's not to say all stealth-based games apply this mechanic, but often we do see guards with predictable patterns, making it easy to pick them off one by one. Games like The Last of Us did a good job of avoiding that though, with their foes always having an air of unpredictability to them, constantly moving around to different sections. Isolated sections, but still, you don't know where exactly they're going to be popping up next. To be fair, the game isn't an open world, making it easier to implicate more sophisticated AI behavior. I mean, you win some, you lose some friends. And at 2, you've been spotted. Speaking of, let's talk about what happens when you've been spotted. Oh no, there's a bunch of enemies running right towards me. Whatever shall I do? Ah, I know, I'll run and run and run some more until I find a decent sized bush out of view from my foes and then hide in there. They'll be clueless as to where I went, and the chances that they'll find me before I circle around and continue my sleuth ways are next to none. This is often the case when guards see you. There's a big commotion until you're able to get away from them, creating enough distance. Sure, that does not apply to all stealth genre titles, as much of the points on this list, but there is a solid bunch of them where it does. What's nice about some games that do this these days is that there are added consequences to when an alarm goes off. More guards may appear, meaning you may have more foes to take out, and the challenge becomes a little bit more difficult. Still, the fact that the search isn't continued after a duration of time seems like a big mistake on their part. I mean, if those NPCs were real, that is. And last but not least, in at number 1, dead bodies. If you stumble upon a dead body, you'd be shook, right? You'd call the authorities, police would arrive within a short time span, and the place would be crawling with authoritative figures capable of arresting suspicious culprits if the evidence leads them to believe they've committed a crime. But in video games, if a guard sees a dead body on the ground, they'll be concerned for like a hot second before carrying on as if they see dead bodies all the time. No big deal, just a dead guy with his gut spewing out. Just another day on the job. For example, in the recent Assassin's Creed Odyssey, guards will spot a dead body and immediately become alert, drawing their weapon and pacing around the nearby area for a certain amount of time until they deem that the threat is gone. But guys, there is literally a dead dude lying inside of the fort and no explanation for how that happened. Then after a while, they'll actually carry the dead bodies and pile them into a corner or toss them off a wall. So maybe NPCs just have little regard for life? Many early stealth games are worse. A guard would briefly look at a fallen peer and barely acknowledge it. So at least it's gotten slightly better over the years. Alright, there we have it friends. What other mechanics in stealth games have baffled you in the past? Give us a shout in those comments below and let us know. If you dug this video, you guys know what to do. Spread that love, hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to Top 10 Gaming for more lists just like this one. In the meantime, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video.